Hello, and welcome to Label Sessions Presents. Label Sessions is a global platform that connects you to the best advice from the most interesting people, whether you want advice, mentoring, or ideas. I'm Josh Nixon, content producer for Label Sessions. In this episode, Iain Montgomery of Label Sessions talks to Tamarisk Saunders-Davies. Tamarisk is a Toronto-based London trade marketing leader stepping up with Gensler to specialise in corporate real estate, architecture, interior design, and professional services. With over 15 years of advising C-suite executives in communication strategies, Tamarisk excels in trend spotting for optimal brand positioning in the media. Iain talks to her to find out more.
So the best way of getting these things started is thank you for doing it. And let's just do that little warm, nice intro of tell us a bit about you, bit of your backstory, how you came from being this person with a posh English name turning up in Canada.
I'm a sensitive Leo who long walks on the beach, and I'm just as happy at home watching Netflix with a bottle of wine. That's enough about my dating profile. Professionally, started off life after leaving university in London. Went into public relations, didn't even really know what it was at the time. Somebody just said, a mate of mine, she was like, I think you'd be really good at it. And, all I knew was like ab fap. And I was like, cool, okay, I'll give that a go. So started kind of getting internships and just trying to figure out, like, does it seem like a viable career? Do I think I'd be good at it? Yeah, did repeated internships at the same place all the way through uni and got my first job there. Turned out to be a terrible place to work, which was,
Sounds like ab fab.
Yeah, it somehow kind of wasn't obvious after all of those internships that I'd done that the culture there wasn't great. Somebody left once a month for 11 months straight, which kind of says something about the culture there. And bounced around a bit at a couple of sort of similar, very consumer-focused agencies until I found myself at a very small firm that had spun out of the PR and the marketing person who'd been at a big UK real estate agency called Savills, and they'd set up their own PR firm covering the property market. And that really was a kind of turning point for me, because I suddenly found that you weren't just sending out samples all the time. You weren't just kind of, stuck in a sample cupboard packing up, shoes and dresses and whatever for whatever a fashion director was calling in. You actually had to know like what it meant if, second homes were going to be included in self-invested pension funds. You needed to know what it meant if interest rates were going up or down and how that would impact the housing market. So suddenly, the job became much more interesting and, much more demanding in terms of figuring out what an interesting story was, putting together some thought leadership around it, the right spokesperson, examples that cover it. And from that firm, I moved on to a bigger firm that did a lot more property, kind of very focused on the residential side of things in London. And at that time, in the kind of mid-2000s, residential property, especially if you were doing big developments, involved a lot of taking developments out to the Middle East and Asia to kind of get the pre-sales out over there. So the campaigns became very international, which was really good fun. And then took a career break in my mid-20s, had a kind of quarter-life crisis, retrained as a psychotherapist, and brought those skills back to the kind of the agency world, which has been, felt like I was kind of going back into work slightly with my tail between my legs, this sort of itch that I'd wanted to scratch. Had kind of gone in a different direction than I had hoped. It's actually incredibly difficult to make a living as a, self-employed therapist in London. It's a very expensive city. And met and fell in love with somebody who's Canadian in London. I'm a dual citizen, so moving to Canada was pretty straightforward for me. And that's how I ended up here.
I feel like the therapy business could have done really well here. Much more open people to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it probably would have.
And in terms of like that experience that you spent like a big chunk of your career in London, then turned up in Toronto, you and I have shared stuff over a drink talking about the challenges of Canada. But what do you see as like the big differences around like that sort of PR marketing world in London versus how it works in Toronto today? And I know you're going to go into a global role shortly, so we'll come to that. But I'd love to like dig into that a bit.
Yeah. getting to Canada and actually sort of finding a first job, I found incredibly challenging. Just purely from a kind of recruitment perspective, the attitude everywhere I went was, you don't have Canadian experience. And I found that so frustrating, because the nuts and bolts of, doing public relations isn't different at all. We're not like chiseling stories onto tablets over here and, hand delivering a story idea to a news desk. It's exactly the same. You know what I mean? Like, are you launching something that solves a problem? Have you got a story angle that is relevant to the news cycle today, right now? So I found it quite dispiriting to kind of be having one-to-ones with, people trying to understand the lay of the land here, figure out who the key players are. Lots of people saying to me in that environment, no, you got great experience, London trained, fantastic. Any agency would be lucky to have you. And then having actual interviews where agencies were saying, oh, but you haven't got Canadian experience. So I think that is a microcosm of something I have observed here, which is I find Canada small c conservative. It's I don't mean politically conservative, I just mean play it safe. And I think how that kind of pulls through into, marketing, advertising, PR, all of it, is just, I don't see the same level of kind of boldness and bravery that you see coming out of, those kind of creative industries in London. I think that's evident even when you just look at the difference between, ad spots that are winning awards at Cannes coming out of UK agencies versus stuff that you're seeing coming out of Canadian agencies. And I know that there can be some great talent here. It's just, I think my hunch is that a lot of those folks at those kind of agencies and, with those clients are kind of hamstrung by their clients, you know what I mean? Who are kind of saying, no, we don't want to push it that far. We don't want to be that brave. We don't want to be that bold. And it's, I think the creativity here suffers as a consequence. I find it just sort of boring.
Does that mean you get to have a bigger impact with what you do in Canada? Because you come from that background of like it being bigger and bolder and more adventurous in London?
That's a good question. I've never really thought about that. I think I don't know that I can't prove the counterfactual. I've only got my experience. I'm, to quote the song, England made me. It's how it's how probably you and I both think. I don't know what it's like to sort of think or approach a kind of creative problem another way. It's certainly been, if there's a sort of secret to my success, it's that I'm not satisfied with, I at the moment I'm working at a design firm, and I came here from another design firm. And I've had experience working with, the interior design world and the property world before. I think, good design firm does good design is not an interesting enough story. It's very difficult to land that in the media, beyond the kind of interior design or architecture trade press. The secret to my success is always to dig further. What does that signal about, broader macroeconomic trends? What does that signal about, say, the return to the office, the return to work? What does that signal about the future of cities? How do any of these projects ladder up to some kind of bigger message about, maybe impact on the climate, something like that? It's just how my brain works.
We'll go back a bit because I want to dig into that in a minute. But talk about so you're now at Gensler. You're about to go into like a global kind of PR role. That's why we managed to get you at short notice to do this podcast. But tell me a bit more about Gensler. Tell me a bit about like the role that you're going into and like what's the sort of the purpose and the heart of the firm, because I suspect if people understand real estate and architecture, they'll know the name, but a lot of people won't.
Yeah, Gensler. There are a lot of lists out there, sort of, naming Gensler as, one of the world's largest architecture and design firms. I like to think about being somebody who works at one of the largest architecture and design firms as being somebody who works at a firm with the biggest impact. We're nearly 7,000 people. We're in 56 countries, 56 offices around the world. That's the opportunity to have a massive impact on, the clients that we are working with, the problems that we're solving. And right now, countries, cities, states, provinces, everybody is facing kind of some enormous and interesting challenges to solve when it comes to things like, what do the future of our cities look like? So it's a really interesting time to be in this world, in architecture and design, because, we're right now, as we're talking, Arizona has had I think the 9th hottest day. It's just day after day after day, it's breaking records for how hot it is there. And it's kind of bonkers to see people flocking to Arizona, to Phoenix. I'm going to stand next to, the mercury kind of shooting through the roof. It's a really exciting time to kind of be working with architects and designers who are trained to solve problems. It's and an output of that can be a beautiful building, but when you sort of talk to these folks that I'm surrounded by all day every day, they are just fascinated by solving demanding complex problems, and that for me is what is interesting about the opportunity to tell the stories of the problems that they're solving.
How do you go about finding the sort of the trends or the stories that are most interesting, that positions the brand as the continued leader in that space?
It's a combination of being incredibly nosy and just naturally being an extrovert. I like talking to people. So, finding the stories, you have to go hunting for them, so it honestly, it's nothing more sophisticated than just having lots of conversations with people. I also read a lot, and that's advice I give to anybody, who I've sort of coached or mentored over my 20 years in public relations. I started out every day, we had a rota, who was reading what newspaper, and you read the same newspaper for a month and then you'd switch. You'd come into the office at 8:30, have a cup of tea, and, if it was my turn to read the Daily Mail, just scream for half an hour. And
I love the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is the best comic book in the world.
You can't give them your eyeballs. Don't do it. Stop.
But it makes me laugh.
Resist the urge. They don't need it. So you have to, if finding those stories is about understanding what's driving the news agenda, which is where, voraciously reading anything and everything, is one part of it. And then, so it's about understanding what's happening out there in the world and connecting that to inside your organization. So I guess if I could sort of sum it up into one word, it's just being constantly curious about what's happening out there and curious about what's happening in here. And just connecting those dots.
And how does that bridge work between PR and architects? Because my experience of meeting architects is they tend to be completely averse to PR. They're quite nerdy. They're often a bit introverted. It's a very different world that they inhabit versus the people who have to go and tell the stories about what they're doing.
Often, if it's somebody who hasn't, worked with somebody who's, help them with PR in the past, you just have to kind of dive in and do it. And then, they can, over time, you earn their trust and they can, see the results of, what you're able to do. And I think that's just where kind of being, curious and interested in other people. I think that's where the kind of, my therapy training kind of comes in. In my experience, the world is just, almost everybody is starved of the experience of just being deeply listened to. So I think a way you can kind of begin to overcome that is just be genuinely interested in what somebody's doing. Continue a dialogue to kind of figure out how you might tell that story to a wider audience. And, most people are sort of, flattered, or that, you want to kind of have your tires pumped a bit. If, somebody's kind of saying to you, I think that's a really interesting thing that you're doing, and I think more people need to know about it. I think there really could be something I could go to the media with there. That can be a very, kind of exciting prospect for somebody, even if they're sort of, I haven't done that before. I don't really know what that would look like. It's my job to kind of, hold their hand and walk them through that process. And my experience has been certainly here. I've had the incredible good fortune to sort of walk some people through that process and had some incredible results to create a sort of, that wheel's really turning, so that it's become sort of, self-generating PR machine. Seems a little bit grandiose, but yeah.
No, don't be so British about this. We can. This is about North America as well. This is all about pumping the tires and being grandiose and being being proud, having a little bit of an ego. What do you like? Is there an example of a story that you're most proud of? It's like that's a thing that sort of Gensler had done, you thought was awesome. You could go and tell that story, and it got kind of traction.
On a macro scale, I'm really proud of the work I've been able to do with one of the architects in the Toronto office, who at the beginning of the pandemic was, phoning up his, developer and landlord clients and just kind of saying like, what's on your mind? What is the key problem that is keeping you up at night? And, a lot of those clients said, look, everybody's working from home and, we're a REIT. We are 60 to 70% in corporate workplaces, with the remaining, 30 to 40% in a bit of retail, a bit of industrial. We don't know if that weighting's right anymore. We don't know if people are going to come back to these office buildings. And they were also looking ahead to the future to kind of say, climate, regulations, government mandated regulations are only going to get tougher. What does that mean for the future of our office buildings? That's what's keeping us up at night, So Stephen, my colleague, said, would it be helpful if we could come up with, some kind of back of a napkin calculation to help you figure out if you could convert office buildings to some other use? And pretty much every single client said, yes, that would be really helpful. Something that is, a lot quicker than a lengthy, what in the architecture world is called a feasibility study, which can take months, and is quite costly, and quite an intensive process. If you could come up with something that's faster than that, that'd be amazing. So he came up with something. They tested a bunch of different building typologies, office to hospital, office to hotel, office to lab. And the thing that they landed on that is the easiest to kind of come up with a quick back of a napkin, assessment is office to residential. And back to my point about, being nosy and talking to people, Stephen and I, he's also a Brit, I respect his intellect. I respect his work ethic, everything. We're good friends. And he told me that, he was working on this with his team. And my job is just to know a little about a lot. So I don't have to know how the entire algorithm works. I don't have to understand how all of those calculations happen in the back end. All I need to know is a good idea when I see one. So I placed a story with the Globe and Mail, which got read by Calgary Economic Development. And at that point in time, Calgary was sitting on an office vacancy rate of nearly 40%, because since 2014 in Canada, Canadian oil has just been...
Calgary as a city was buggered long before the pandemic with regards to sort of downtown real estate.
Exactly. So they had a lot of office vacancy as a result of the collapse in Canadian oil prices, and then the pandemic hit. So at that point, they were even in a worse vacancy position than when Detroit declared bankruptcy, just to kind of put that into, a wider context. So Calgary Economic Development read this news story, phoned Stephen up and said, like, could we bring you guys in to kind of assess the buildings in downtown Calgary? Of course, we said yes. That turned into, a piece of work that Calgary Economic Development could bring to the city of Calgary. The city of Calgary made some very simple, straightforward tax incentives available to the community, and have been very fast and incredibly progressive about, making those tax incentives available. And now they have nearly 10 buildings going through the conversion process. And it's become like office to residential conversions has been something that has just caught on like absolute wildfire. Stephen has spoken at the White House. He's going back to speak at the White House later this summer. Lots of, cities and states are asking us to come in to kind of help them figure out how they might take this approach, what's working, what isn't working. I just feel incredibly proud to be a small part of a, group of people who are really thinking about, like, how do you solve this problem? There's corporate mortgage-backed securities, which are, coming due. And a lot of people are sort of thinking, well, I don't know if we can refinance this mortgage. What are we going to do with these buildings? So it's a solution that solves problems on multiple different levels. People can still make money. We can improve the housing supply. We can stop these buildings getting demolished, which saves all of that embodied carbon. It's a phenomenal success story, and I've just been incredible. We've been, it's a good idea meets luck. You know what I mean? Which is remember what that saying is or who said it, you know what I mean? But luck is kind of preparation meets opportunity.
No, nobody talks about luck enough. Like nobody says, you know what, I did a really good thing, but it wouldn't have happened if
we were lucky.
So-and-so hadn't read the paper that day.
Yes, yeah, we were lucky to have the right thing at the right time. You know, if we talked about this 3 years before the pandemic, everybody would think it just would have sunk like a stone. It would have been sort of, that's kind of interesting. And it would have just died on the vine as, you know, one-time cool thing that we did.
Am I allowed to ask you what your view of the office is? Because you are an office-centric organization. You kind of have to be. You make buildings.
I love being in the office. You know, I'm an extrovert. I absolutely hate working from home. It's also how I do my job is better, I think. It's like being around people, you know, like it's always through sort of stopping. And I've very rarely come up with a really good idea for a story, you know, by hammering out Teams messages, you know, or like doing my email. You know, a good idea for a story comes from, you know, just running by a colleague and asking them what they're up to, you know, what's going on, you know, what are you seeing? What are your clients saying? You know, I read this. What do you think about it? You know, that was another, on a micro level, to kind of go back to your previous question. Another story I'm really proud of is, we got to tell the story of how law firms are changing. And that, you know, it's on a sort of much smaller scale, but the pandemic has really shifted how lawyers use their offices. You know, they suddenly had to go back home. They were forced to not be printing stuff constantly because they were just like, holy shit, I got to print this at home. Like, printer, this is really expensive, you know, like I can't keep buying printer cartridges. You know, and they still had to kind of clear cases through court, and they realized that they could, you know, clear a lot of these cases virtually. So that has meant that, even transitioning back to the office, we're now building spaces which are incredibly complex spaces to build because of the privacy and the AV requirements to, you know, present to a judge in these environments. They have to be very secure. But they also, you know, you're also bringing clients through, so that there's the client experience of arriving. So that has to be taken care of. Like, these are all things that designers think about. I would have never have landed on that as an interesting story had I not been in the office talking to somebody who had sort of, you know, mentioned it in an offhand way. So yeah, for me personally, I can see the benefit of the office. I don't think the office is going anywhere. And I think Gensler's research for a long time, even before the pandemic, you know, our research was showing that the office is not performing in the way it needs to meet everybody's needs, just in terms of, you know, people have been kind of hybrid even before the pandemic. You know, I mean, your previous life as a consultant, you know, you're often seconded to your client's office, you know, so
yeah, my office was C13D on Air Canada.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so you're working at the airport, you're working at your client's location, you know, technically you work for, you know, Green Dot Consultancy and you're on their payroll, you know, but you're not physically in the office. So it's accelerated a trend. But I don't think anybody thinks, you know, the large majority, I think, people don't think the office is going anywhere. They can still see a need for it. You know, it just depends on how often people are back. And
it's just changed, which is pretty great for firms like Gensler who go, we can redesign that for you.
This podcast is brought to you by Label Sessions, the global platform that connects you to the best advice from the most interesting people. Around the world, we work with brands to connect their people to true leaders, just like the people you hear on this podcast, for live sessions of advice, mentoring, or sometimes to collaborate on ideas. To find out more, visit labelsessions.com and book in for a demo with our team.
So something I'm interested in is, you have like PR, marketing, sales. When it comes to how it works for you guys, there's like an interesting topic around B2B sales at the moment with people who, I always find weird when people talk about B2B sales and it's just this magical beast with, you're still selling to a person, you're not selling to a logo. How does it work for you guys when you're sort of, there's the PR side of it, there's the pitch side of it, the sales side of it, the marketing side of it. How do you join it all together so it becomes this coherent thing that people can go, I get that, I want to work with you guys, not somebody else?
The way there's, you know, the nuts and bolts of, you know, get RFP, respond to RFP, go to presentation, all of that. I think something Gensler takes very seriously is the relationship side of things, So I think going back to what you were saying, you're not an organization, you're not one logo selling to another logo. You are a bunch of people who can solve some problems, talking to another group of people who have a bunch of problems that they would like some humans to solve. So I think from a 30,000 foot view, I don't think B2B sales is different to kind of any other style of selling. You don't have a business unless you solve a problem. Whatever your business is, you need to solve a problem. You don't solve a problem, you don't have a business. I think the crypto bros need to absolutely hear that. That's my view. I'm just not convinced. Personally, I'm not convinced that crypto solves a problem. I think it is a solution in search of a problem right now. So I think that's why people find it all very confusing. An organization like Gensler's, we solve very literally concrete problems. It could be anything from a hospital. How do you improve patient outcomes? How do you create a healthcare environment that really prioritizes health and wellness and feels like an incredible place to be at a moment where you perhaps are at, your most frightened, or you are accompanying a family member who is going through, maybe one of the worst, periods of their life. How do you create an airport which feels far more empathic, that can, make a long wait far less boring? Airports can be very confusing places. I would argue so can hospitals from a signage and wayfinding perspective. How do you create those moments through, passive wayfinding, EGD, environmental graphic design, all of that stuff to make these environments feel more human, that have the impact that you want them to have on the people who have to use them. So for me, B2B selling is about just all the way through communicating the value that you bring to solving those problems, whatever it might be.
I love there's so many places you look at it, like, you designed this on a spreadsheet. You did not think about a human being as you made this. And there's so many things that when it comes to, you translate that to sales, it ends up being a thing where it's, you designed this on a PowerPoint slide. You went step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. We'll sell this thing, and nothing ever works in that sort of circumstance. It happens through somebody reading a newspaper article, happens through telling about a story, happens through we solved this problem in a different way. That's the thing that grabs the emotional side of it, and then the rest of it, you can still do the checklist. But I feel like people forget that.
Yeah. So I think, that's one of the reasons why Gensler, is so invested to the level that we are in research, is because we really want to understand something that feels a bit more intangible. How do you kind of quantify a human experience? That's something that we're trying to quantify, because anything we touch, anything we build, anything that we design has to have that human experience at the heart of it, so that it is an experience which is designed for a human being. It's not designed to be just a building model in Revit. Ultimately this thing is going to be built and lived in some way. I think, you could argue that's what good architecture really does do. The architects that really do create spaces that, on a kind of existential level, a spiritual level, kind of move people, are able to think about the kind of experience that they're trying to create for the people who are living in those buildings.
I've always said the best people I've worked with who are in the innovation realm, they've often been people who did industrial design or architecture. And then most of them, when they got bored of doing their architecture degree and they were like, this is too long, and they dropped out of it, but they brought a lot of that thinking through to, how do I design a better digital product? But there's something in the sort of the classically trained architect that does something in a better and different way.
I have come to know architects as people who have this extraordinary level of discipline to stay with the problem for a really long time. You know what I mean? You have to have the discipline to stay curious about what the real problem is you are trying to solve, instead of rushing to a solution. Maybe that's an engineering approach, you know what I mean? An engineer is we got to solve it, whereas I think architects, we are going to solve it, but we need to have the discipline to really understand the problem so that the solution that we're proposing is the right solution. And that skill it's very interesting to kind of witness and be around and see. I think, I don't think I have it, I think I'm just solve problems, whereas architects are sort of like, we will solve problems, but we really need to understand and have the discipline to stay with the problem long enough to know what problem it is that we are solving. It may not be the first order problem. It's probably something a couple of orders below.
There's a beautiful combination of someone who's very diligent and like sticks with the problem, sees it through, versus alongside the person who throws shit at a wall and sees what sticks.
Yes.
And when you end up having the combination of two, they probably drive each other insane.
Yeah.
But you end up getting to better outcomes.
Yeah, one probably looks like the other, you know, and I wonder if the person who's just sort of throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks is like, I do have the discipline to stay with the problem, you know, and it's just sort of like, no, this is just a lot of solutioning. It's not the same.
There's a joke in there about consultants, but I'm not going to go there. So Josh, our resident content producer / stalker, he dug up a quote of yours where you said, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
Mm-hmm.
How have you applied your own advice in your own career?
Let me first say, I don't think that's something a quote I can lay claim to. I'm sure somebody else said it, but
don't worry, but don't take credit. You may have borrowed it, but take credit. But you said it in an article in 2012.
I think it's true. So I'll say that. Well, like I mean, like it goes back to the conversation we were having at the beginning with like getting to Canada and trying to find my first job here. You know, so I was hearing one thing in, informational meetings I was having with, people at agencies, etc. Versus interviews. So people kept saying, well, you don't have Canadian experience. So I stopped doing what I'd always done. I just started very directly asking people more blunt questions. So, you know, in interviews, a question I often ask is, you know, what is stopping you from offering me this role? And then I would start saying, if they didn't volunteer that you haven't got Canadian experience thing, I would just say, my hunch is one of the reasons why you're hesitating, you might hesitate in offering me this role is that I don't have Canadian experience. And, people would sort of sheepishly bring that up. And then I would have an anecdote to kind of say, well, like, here's how I've been in a similar situation and here's how I got over it. Every PR worth their salt, if you've been in the game 5 years or longer, has been in a situation where you have an incredible relationship with somebody who goes on family leave, who goes and moves over to a different beat, who leaves to go freelance and is no longer getting commissions on the type of stuff the type of stories that you use to pitch them. And suddenly you've lost a really amazing contact that you have to figure out a new way to kind of get into that particular publication. So you do what you're good at, which is like, let me help. It goes back to B2B sales. Like, you solve a journalist's problem, like these are the things you write about. Here's a spokesperson. Here's why it's newsworthy. Here's some quotes. I can connect you to an interview. Here are some times that they are available. Here's video, here's B-roll, here's video, here's, photography. And you deliver value to the person that you're talking to. So that's a case of how I pivoted. I guess that's what that saying is getting at. To land a role. I was fortunate enough to be sitting in front of a woman who is a complete hustler. She moved here as she had refugee status when she first got to Canada at the age of 4 or 5, not speaking a word of English. And she had every single reservation that I called out, which is sort of like, I bet you don't want to give me the role because I don't have Canadian experience. I bet you don't want to give me this role because I don't have a Rolodex of contacts in the Canadian media. Here's how I've been in situations like that, but in the past, and here's how I've overcome them. And she was like, oh, shit, I can't argue with this. She's hustles the same way I do, she's talked me into it.
I love that. I've heard the story 100 million times of like, you don't have Canadian experience. I've like had it when I pitch my own stuff. I've had it from friends, I've had it from family who've come here. And it's a bullshit attitude, but like, I love your approach to breaking through it. I haven't heard that enough. Like,
necessity is the mother of invention. I'm just sort of like, I would be bored not working, and unfortunately my boyfriend, now husband, isn't gonna just pay for me to sit around all day. Like, I've got to find something to do, so it's just sort of like, if this isn't working, I have to pivot and find another. I've got to cut through, because the problem is not that I'm not getting interviews. It wasn't like you just need to kind of apply to more stuff that you see on LinkedIn. It had to be something different.
You can't keep throwing shit at a wall. You have to keep being diligent about solving the problem,
You
right?
have to have the discipline to stay with the problem, Iain.
What comes next for you? So what's on the horizon for where you're going and where you're excited about for where like the role that you grow into now?
It's really exciting to be. I'm moving into. You sort of hinted at it. I'm joining the global team, so it's really exciting to have this new opportunity ahead of me to tell the stories that are inside of our organization at that global level. It's just a lot of these stories are happening in our offices locally, and there's a whole team of people who do an incredible job of telling Gensler stories in the local markets, and it's just going to be a really incredible to kind of connect the dots to see where the trends are happening nationally, internationally, and figure out where we have domains of excellence and experience and cross-pollinate that. And I'm really excited about having the opportunity to see what comes from getting to get connected to a different level of our organization.
It's amazing. I don't think I realized how big Gensler and how international Gensler was. So you have to keep feeding me with the stories that come through it. I'm going to go into the quick fire questions now.
Okay.
I won't ask you all of them, but I'll pick a few. But where do you go to feed your brain creatively?
I guess nature.
Tell me more.
I don't. My brain's not different to anybody else's brain. Like the creative ideas come when you are disconnected from the day to day. My experience, I think it's the same with a lot of people, is when you're a bit bored, and you have a bit of expansiveness. You're out walking the dog. You're not on Teams calls, Zoom calls, whatever. Mucking about with Excel spreadsheets or whatever. Your brain is able to just wander, and it's like where you always get those really good ideas in the shower is, you're not sitting in front of a screen. I think it's any time when you're not just sitting in front of a screen, your brain can just, let go a bit.
What do you think's overhyped right now? Or is there anything that you think isn't being picked up as much as it should be?
I'm kind of really bored of all things social media personally right now. I just, not on Threads. Don't at this point think I'm going to join Threads. I see all of my TikToks the way somebody my age should see TikToks, which is 3 weeks later when they show up on Instagram. I feel very over, and I feel very over social media right now. I'm always craving more in-person interaction. Understandable.
Social media is a drug.
True. I agree with that.
What's the number one thing in PR that you should not say?
Well, my number one maxim for PR is we don't lie, but we do spin.
Very Alistair Campbell of you.
Yeah, by that, you have to understand, sometimes you just have to sort of carefully shape the story that you were telling. That doesn't, you should never be lying, never lie about what it is that you're telling. But, sometimes it can just take a bit of digging a bit further to figure out like what the really interesting story is.
Okay. You work for an architecture and design company. What's your own taste in interior design?
More is more.
Tell me more. What does that mean? I'm sitting in a white room. I don't know enough about this stuff.
My house is chaos. I am like a creative. I don't know. I'm just like a magpie. I just like more pattern, more print, more texture, more pictures on the wall, more fucking lamps. My husband is sick of it. In fact, how many more lamps are we going to be buying? And I'm like, you'll know when I'm done. I don't like Christian Niagara style, completely sort of, one chair that is enormously uncomfortable and a delicate vase. Like that to me is not relaxing. I think I like my environments to look like the inside of my brain, cluttered, messy, way too much going on, too many open tabs. That's my style.
I'm into that. This he says while sitting in a mostly white room, but I only rent this place. So, okay, two more. What do you do when you're not working?
My favorite thing to do is have people over to my very cluttered, very messy, very open tabs home. Like I and maybe I'm not, I'm not pretending to be the world's greatest cook or anything, but I absolutely love just bringing people together. It's my absolute favorite thing to do. I love having people over. If I'm not doing that, I still read, I read a newspaper every day. Like I don't read the Times for its political perspective. I read it for all of the extra stuff, especially the Sunday Times. Like I really miss having the actual paper, the Sunday Times. So read the style section and read the culture section and, read all the long form journalism that shows up in the Sunday Times magazine. I've even started up, like, I'm dyslexic, so I'm a very slow reader. So like book clubs have always been terrible for me because it takes me forever to read a book. And if it's a book I hate, then I'm just like, I don't want to waste like months of my life reading this book I hate just because I'm in a book club. So I started an article club with a group of mates. So, I can get through 1,000 words of an article, on the
That's way better. I haven't heard anyone do that.
Yeah,
it's so much better.
We have article club.
I want to join.
Tons of interesting journalism out there, you know what I mean? And, a lot of it's often it can be about like quite current affairs, so we've done the metaverse, like what do we all think of it? We've done one, what else have we done? We've had a couple now. And there's an article that I've got bookmarked about the Goop cruise. So Gwyneth Paltrow is now doing like these Goop related sort of cruises as part of, I don't know, if it's Celebrity Cruises or whatever the line is that has her on.
There is an amazing market in celebrity cruises because years ago I joked about taking my old team on the Trailer Park Boys cruise. And I love the idea that a boat 1 week is doing the Trailer Park Boys cruise and then they bring it back into dock, sterilize it with something healthy, no chemicals, and then do the Goop cruise the following week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like that, and that combines, I think like that combines one of my, like some of my two favorite things. It's just sort of like, I'm fascinated. I find current affairs. I love reading about current affairs. I like long form journalism over news. So that like article club combines one of my favorite things, like getting people to physically together and then, just reading. So that's another thing that I've got going on.
I love that. That's amazing. One last one then. On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you?
Oh, here I'm off the charts. Like, turn it up to 11. I think, honestly, the best compliment I've ever been paid was by maybe one of the most eccentric women I've ever met, who told me she thought I was eccentric. And I was like, oh, I've never been so flattered. That is the nicest thing you've ever said to me. And at that point, I was only in my late 20s. I'm just like, I've got such a massive runway ahead of me to become really dial this up. If you think I'm eccentric now, wait until I'm in my 60s.
Genuinely batshit.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
Amazing. Thank you for this. I feel like our conversation rambled all over the place, but like these are the best ones.
Good.
And I vaguely followed Josh's script, so thank you so much.
So concludes another episode of Label Sessions Presents. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast no matter your platform of choice, and of course, start your journey today with us at labelsessions.com.